All right, guys, we got to go ahead and talk about a massive update that happened to the entire Nintendo ecosystem over the last, 12 hours, at least at the time of recording this video, maybe 24 hours. Look, the bottom line is Nintendo announced a bunch of things coming to Nintendo Switch, and conversely, Nintendo Switch 2 dealing with a massive system update that would allow for things like virtual game sharing and other aspects they didn't actually previously announce getting added. Now, a lot of this news is actually really, really good news, especially when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 in terms of getting ready to have your data transfer over to Switch 2. Yes, folks, there is some cool stuff going on here. Also, it appears after this update we're talking about, a new firmware update, that Nintendo actually lied and we lost a function that is very, very sad. And look, guys, it is what it is. We're going to go and report the news, the good and the bad, all of it surrounding this 20.0.0 update, including things that maybe you haven't even heard of because Nintendo kind of hid all this stuff a little bit on their website. So before we dive in, folks, I want to remind you that we are giving away 2 Nintendo Switch 2 bundles. That's right, those are the Switch 2 plus Mario Kart World bundles. We're giving away 2 of them right now. You can go ahead and enter down in the pinned comment or in the description. And let's just start off with this by talking about what happened. So, look, firmware update 20.0.0 dropped on Switch, and it added new features that were actually intended for Switch 2, such as Game Share, a feature that now exists on Switch 1, but you can't actually use it yet. I mean, you can open it up, and it looks like it'll work, but bottom line is, you don't own a Switch 2 yet, right? So, Game Share only works by beaming games from Switch 2 to Switch 1. So, that's there now, but you can't use it. But there were 2 other major changes, actually 3, in this update that Nintendo did promise would come before the end of the month. One of them is virtual game card sharing, and the other was actually a surprise update to the Nintendo Switch eShop. And the last one, just stay tuned for that. So let's start with the biggest thing, virtual game sharing. There is this all-new, never-before-seen feature on any home console that allows you to share or borrow, and sometimes both, your digital library of games over to others. The explanation for it and how to set it up is actually quite convoluted, but they do provide clear instructions on your Switch and their website, so most people that want to take advantage of this should complete the process if they want to opt into it. When you do opt in, you can share your virtual library in 2 different ways once set up. One is a 2-switch situation. Say you and your significant other or best friend, family, whatever, you can link up 2 Switch 2s together, then freely share your digital games with each other, even if not in the same room or even the same area from across the globe. And the library is truly shared. You don't need to have them send you the game. You can just play it, but only one person at a time can play a given game. This works with your entire digital library, not just Nintendo games, so fairly simple for the most part. The other way you can share them is in person with other people on your Nintendo Switch Online account. In my case, I have 3 kids and my best friend, Eric. If they are on my Nintendo Switch Online family plan, I can lend them a virtual game in person for up to 14 days at a time. I will not be able to play that virtual game myself that I lend out while it's lent. However, Nintendo was forward thinking enough to realize that if you want your games you purchased back right away, you should be able to do this without telling or making your friend send it back. So you totally could recall the game at any time when connected to the internet if you were the owner of the game. It's pretty neat. You can lend 3 individual games with up to 3 people on your Nintendo Switch Online service at any given time. This does not replace the 2 linked systems that can freely play any one of one person's digital library, just not at the same time. So technically, one person can own a massive digital library and up to 5 people can play individual games from that library at the same time. That's actually kind of neat. I gotta be honest, virtual game sharing sounds like a really cool thing, and it sounds extremely similar to the way that, family sharing works on Steam, but there's nothing else like this on home console. PlayStation doesn't have this, Xbox doesn't have this. Honestly, all of this sounds really, really good. Of course, the problem is, like all new things, there's always a catch. And the catch has to do with the way things already worked. They announced this. We got to go to this website over here, Crossplay. There was something about the old system of sharing games that people really liked. And we got to go down here to where there's a quote from a Nintendo representative. So we get to the quote here, and it says, "If you liked how the old system worked, it seemed you can keep doing that way. We think many people will enjoy the benefits of virtual game card, but it is an optional feature and the original method can be used instead," said a Nintendo spokesperson. So here we have a Nintendo spokesperson saying, hey, virtual game cards are really cool and we think a lot of people are going to like this. However, we understand that not everyone's going to like this and they're going to prefer the old method. And the thing is, Nintendo actually hinted at this during the video revealing virtual game cards with the following that is actually already quoted in here. So we'll just look at it. It says, "By navigating to user settings, online license settings, and turning the setting on, you can instead opt to connect to the internet to start up software." So, well, that is interesting because look, how did this work before? That's what we need to get into. Well, Nintendo actually had a guide on this at one point. The guide is no longer on their FAQ as of last night. They deleted it. But thankfully, we have, archive, the web archive out there that has this out here. So this is how it used to work. This is the old method. So how to play the same digital game at the same time with different Nintendo accounts. If you want to play your game at the same time, someone else also plays it. Make sure you are playing on a system that is not the primary console for your Nintendo account. You'll need to have an active internet connection on that system. The other user must play on the primary console for your Nintendo accounts. So, essentially how this worked, all right? How this worked was you could have a primary and secondary console, which PlayStation and Xbox also let you do. They even promote it on their website. What you could do is set your own console to be a secondary console and your partner or friend's console to be the primary. On the primary system, any other account on that system can play your digital library. On the secondary system, only your account can play that game. So you would boot up the game on your secondary system, then boot up the same game with a different account on your primary system, and you could play the games at the same time. Moreover, many people didn't know this, you could actually play multiplayer games together off a single copy, such as Splatoon 3, Animal Crossing New Horizons. So after the 20.0.0 update, this actually doesn't work anymore. While Nintendo did add a new setting in the settings menu to turn on online licensing, which is turned off by default, which does allow two people to play the same single-player game at the same time, though you have to turn on airplane mode on the primary Switch to get it to work, which Nintendo doesn't actually explain this anywhere on their own website or documentation because that's the only way to boot two copies at the same time. It means that no, both cannot play online together anymore. In fact, it'll boot you off if you try to connect back online. So yeah, pretty shitty of Nintendo. Nintendo did not, as that spokesperson so eloquently put it, keep the old system. They fundamentally changed it, and then to keep even getting part of the old system, it requires extra steps that aren't explained anywhere. Kind of a big yikes. This may not matter for most Switch owners, to be clear, but it does matter to some. Moving on, there is at least one feature Nintendo did not announce before the update, and that is that you can also loan out individual DLC packs. So even if multiple people on your NSO family group have the same game, you can actually borrow them the DLC, just like a game, which is actually pretty neat. So still per usual, Nintendo adds some really cool functionality, and nobody else has outside of Steam with Family Share, but then takes away a standard feature every console had. One step backwards, one step forward, whatever that saying is. Now, I did mention there were two other big updates in the 20.0.0 thing, and one has to do with profile pictures and the eShop, and then the other one has to do with getting ready for Switch 2. So let's first go over the profile pictures. So we see over here, Oatmeal Dome has a nice photo here of this. Some default profile icons were changed in 20.0.0. Here's a handy chart to compare the differences. It hopes the image compression doesn't make it too hard to compare. And you can kind of see most of it isn't too big of a change. The biggest change being Donkey Kong. So the two Donkey Kong icons have been redesigned to his new design in Donkey Kong Bonanza, which seems to be based more on the Mario movie design. Personally, I actually like this design more. I know some people don't, but we've had that rare design, the Donkey Kong you see on the left a long time ago, decades ago. This kind of returns him more to the silly vibes he had in the very early days. I actually like it. But yeah, you can see these icons all had some changes, some bigger than others. Kind of interesting that the star one had a change, right? Why would that one update it? Beats me, but Nintendo updated it probably because they were updating icons for Switch 2, and that's just literally what they came up with. But they also updated the eShop. And for the first time in 15 years, the eShop is no longer themed orange. Well, okay, I mean, technically, like there's been select Mario events where it was themed red in the past, but it was all temporary. Now it's actually just straight up red. And the thing is, that wasn't the only update to the eShop. In fact, there are some things that changed inside the eShop you might not have noticed. Let's take a look over here at the install base forums, where it said, I just updated my Switch with the latest system update, and notice that the eShop icon has changed color from orange to red. Sure. Going inside, I saw the eShop ranking method has been changed. This is for bestsellers. The bestseller rankings, including in the software search, are by dollar now, not units. So like dollars made instead of units sold. In the search, there is also a toggle to display Switch 2 games, which, I mean, yeah, that doesn't really matter right now, but it's there for Switch 2. The rankings are only for the last 3 days when it used to be for 2 weeks. So far, I've looked only at the US eShop, and I'll update once I know more. Source, my personal Nintendo Switch. You've read this here first on install base. But there's an update to this. They didn't get rid of the old stuff, they just hid it. So a great find by @TheMoon. If you switch the eShop search from the default sort by bestseller/popularity on the top right to sort by relevance, as far as we could tell, you get, drum roll, the old chart sorted by unit sales for the last 2 weeks. So as far as we could tell, the default popularity in bestsellers is revenue based for the last 3 days. Relevance is unit-based for the last 2 rolling weeks. Now, you might go, why did they even make this change? A lot of it was probably to deal with a lot of shovelware popping up on the bestsellers list. Look, there was a common trick a lot of indie companies were using where they were greatly reducing their price, sometimes as low as $1 or even a penny, to boost sales numbers rapidly and then increase that price like a day later. But because they had so many sales in such that short period, they appear on the bestsellers list, which then might get people to purchase the game at the higher price point. It was a way to game the system, and this seems to be a way to handle that. Again, it also, as you can tell, would favor AAA games that sell decently well. So even if an indie game is selling more, but the indie game is sold at $10, it wouldn't necessarily appear over, say, a AAA game selling at $60, $70, $80 that is selling for less. So there is that. Also, some people feel like the eShop is a little bit snappier. Look, I messed around with it last night on live stream and a little bit today. I personally don't think it's actually any snappier at all. But, you know, some people think it is. Maybe it's snappier by a couple milliseconds. I don't know. The eShop on Switch 2 is still a laggy mess to me and not an enjoyable experience. But obviously, they needed to release an update to the eShop to make it compatible with whatever they're doing on the Switch 2. Now, you would think that's the end of the updates, right? But no, actually, Nintendo is being actually kind of a good boy here. They know Nintendo Switch 2 is expensive, right? You know Nintendo Switch 2 is expensive. Even if you think it's worth the price, $450 or $500 for the bundle is still a large chunk of change to drop when you can get a Switch Lite for $200, right? So Nintendo realizes that a lot of people might want to trade in their Switch 1 or sell it to help pay for their Nintendo Switch 2. But the problem with that is there's a lot of save data and other things on your Switch 1 that need a system transfer and can't be put in cloud save backups. So things like your Animal Crossing Island or your Splatoon data or your Pokemon games, all of that requires you to actually do a local transfer. You can't actually do, you know, an online backup of it, or at least you couldn't. Because you see, Nintendo snuck another thing into this 20.0.0 update, and this thing they snuck in is actually helping everyone out who's trying to trade in their Switch 1 towards the Switch 2. Let's take a look here. So we have the official update page on the support page. It goes over all the various things that we already talked about here, the game share stuff, which obviously doesn't work right now because you need a Switch 2. And all the system transfer, the virtual game card stuff, how that all works. But how about this? The system transfer to Nintendo Switch 2 has been added under System Settings. System. You can perform a system transfer from your Nintendo Switch to Nintendo Switch 2 using local communication. We already know that, right? What's the big deal? Well, it's what it says next. For users that will lose access to their Nintendo Switch before receiving their Nintendo Switch 2, there is an option to upload a system transfer data to a dedicated server, which can then be retrieved on their Nintendo Switch 2. After you upload your system transfer data to the dedicated server, the Nintendo Switch system will initialize to factory settings, so only perform this transfer if you'll be able to complete the transfer, or if you'll be, obviously able to do it on Nintendo Switch 2 or whatever. So what they're trying to say here is they are giving you an ability. You can still do the local transfer, but they are giving you the ability to basically wipe your Switch 1 and upload all the data up to the cloud and a dedicated server that is entirely separate from their cloud saves. This to me is brilliant. I'm really happy Nintendo's doing it. They absolutely did not need to do this. This is like, where I talk about this update is kind of weird. It's got some pro-consumer things in it, such as this. This is very pro-consumer. And then it's got that broken promise, that lie, I guess, at this point, that the old game share system would still function and work correctly and work the same, and it doesn't. Even if you don't opt in, it doesn't. If you just update to 20.0.0, you can't do that sharing anymore of the old method. So, look, Nintendo is, as I said, taking mostly steps forward here with 20.0.0, but some disappointing steps backward as well. And yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Nintendo didn't lie, because that spokesperson definitely told a bold-faced lie. They said that you could just opt out and use the old system, but you can't. It's actually a new version of the old system that still requires some finagling that you don't even explain on your website just to get the basic function working, and the online play doesn't work at all. So, all right, that's going to do it, folks. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. There was so much to go over. We had to make a dedicated video on just this one thing. If there's more news and stuff, we'll obviously get a second video out later today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I am Nathaniel Relvajans from Nintendo Prime. And as always, I'll catch you guys in the next video, or maybe on that Nintendo Byte podcast tonight. Bye, everyone.